What's up, everybody? We are back. We've been waiting, like we kind of been busy, with everything going on. We had callings, we had, the holidays. Now it's ProQuest season, and we've been wanting to get back to our strategy series and dive into it more. But it's hard to do that sometimes. Life gets busy, and one of the things we talked about, Jason and Dane and I have talked about, is, as we've said, Nick and Adam are going to allow us to hopefully put out more high quality strategy content, some cool in-depth talks about the game. They're both really accomplished players, and it's going to be a big, boom for the channel to have them. So today we jump back in strategy series. This is episode 2. They're really far apart. I don't even know how long, and maybe a shame to look at it. But this is going to be a series that we're going to really kick back up. We're starting today with how to tune your decks for ProQuest Week 3. Nick and I both had an opportunity to play in a ProQuest recently. We got top 8 with our Starvo deck that we crafted together. Nick got second, almost took it down in a Starvo mirror, but that's the way it goes, Starvo being Starvo. So today,
and of course we had to play each other in the quarterfinals.
Yeah, that was
the exact same 80 card mirror. And let's just say it was a roller coaster. It was an ordeal.
Yeah.
And I think we played 10 turns before either of us took any damage.
Yep.
It was, quite a match.
It was, yeah. Let's just say that one of the cards we're going to talk about. So we're going to kick off. We're going to go through every single deck in the game. We're going to try to keep them short and succinct. It's going to be 2 to 3 things probably per hero. We'll give some of our explanations on why, and hopefully a little bit of info. We won't go too far because, like I said, too much info just leads to like a diluted message, and we just want to give you guys the good high points, hopefully give you some things to point you out. So we're going to get started. Our first hero is Starvo. He's the star of the show right now, and the first thing we talked about that was very relevant in our game, because we both kind of gotcha'd each other, but we both knew it was completely coming, is I think a must add in this deck is Exposed to the Elements, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it's honestly been a barrier breaker for us, and the ability to play it double fuse and then put a -1 counter on the shield and potentially blow up the crown is just such a blowout, and it really forces them to have it. If they get greedy, they pitch for an Icy Whale with their last card, they try to arsenal that red, you can get so much value and then just grind them out in a long game.
Yeah. It wins the grind. It wins that grind game every single time. And I think that it gives you value in other matchups. It offers an opportunity to get the footsteps into Prism. It gets the Blood Sheath. We've both taken out Blood Sheaths in our, I think we're up to 3 or 4 on the Blood Sheath body count. Because until people respect it, it becomes great. And I think that's what week 3 of the ProQuest and on is about, is those subtle adjustments. So we definitely encourage, I think Exposed is a one of. It's great one of tech. The next thing is D-Reacts. I think it's a must. I get the full reveal. I get that Elemental is a thing, but you got to play some D-Reacts. You got to defend yourself. You got to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Especially into the mirror too. If you're not playing some number of D-Reacts, you leave yourself open to just getting run over.
Yep.
And you need that ability to have some D-Reacts, have some ability to interact with your opponent when they're doing those crazy, reveal into Crippling, reveal into Oakenold. And also, when you're using those D-Reacts, have an idea of what you want to do with those D-Reacts. Use them specifically, and if that window doesn't come, remember, it's going to be a grindy matchup. You have Crown. You will be flying through your deck. They'll come back up. Don't be afraid to crown it away if you don't have a good thing to react with it. I had more than a few times some Bravos cover up a whale with a staunch response, and it was not worth it.
Yep.
It's not worth it.
It's a mistake. The last one is the bad elements got to go. Like, the bad elements need to go. I get that you have to have a certain number of elements, but be specific about the ones that you put in your deck. Take out the chaff. Like, don't put in the bad ones. Find the best versions of them. I don't get. We tried it at the beginning. I understand Electrify looks enticing because of that extra the extra damage, but more often than not, you're not going to play stuff out of your arsenal. So like putting it in your arsenal can oftentimes just get it back into the deck. Overall, it's just not a great card. It doesn't attack. In a worst case scenario, it'll never even attack.
Right. You want your element cards to be something you can at least play in the game. Blake and I can talk about in our game. One of the ways I was able to keep tempo is flashing into Winter's Grasp into a whale. I did that 2 turns in a row.
Yeah.
Like you actually want your element cards to be something that you can play and not, feel like you want to die or you're immediately going to lose.
Yep.
So the Electrify, you're not going to get much value out of it. I saw somebody with some of the Weave Ice, Weave Earth, Weave Lightning.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Don't do it. It's a trap. It's a trap. So next up, we're going to go to Lexi. We're going to talk about Lexi. I think Lexi is a deck that has some play in the meta, and her disruption is very good. And I think that's the most important thing is I think you have to lean disruption. I understand that Remorseless is enticing. I get it because of something like Chain, but the reality is that doesn't win you that matchup, but more disruption does win you other ones. I think people don't realize how tight cost curves are currently in the meta, and being able to threaten more Frostbites or more discards from Chilling Ice Vein is just so good right now that those arrows that have disruptive effects more than life loss effects are, I think, in my opinion, what win you those matchups.
Right. You want to play cards that stop your opponent from doing what they're doing as opposed to punish them for doing what they're doing.
Yep.
Your Remorseless might get them for 4 life, but if they hit you for 25, did you really trade positively in that interaction? In that situation, you're going to get more life out of it, but you want to be able to stop them from doing what they're doing, especially these decks that are playing to these huge hands that are going to be able to blow you out if you don't interact with them.
Yep. I think that's huge. The other thing is combat chain interaction. You have to demand blocks, force them to block you. I think that like right now everybody's running, or a lot of decks are running the red Frost Fangs because the card is insane at the end of an attack. That's where like you find attacks that are impactful that force your opponent to block, that they have to have answers for on the combat chain, and they don't just go cool, take it, cool, take it, cool, take it. Remove cards from their hand. That's how you win as Lexi.
Yep, pull cards from hand. Any opportunity possible.
Next up, we're going to continue down the train. We're going backwards if you haven't noticed. We're in tails. So next up is our girl Briar, once the monster of the meta. Now she's simply somebody who sits on the sidelines. I think one of the big things with Briar is think big. Like I think that was Nick's line. Think big and combo. She is stuck in this box where sometimes people play her like Cheerios Briar with Channel Mount Heroic. That's not how you play her. That's just not the way you do it. You can vomit out huge turns, but is trading 10s with Starvo the thing? Or do you just go, you know what? Channel Mount Heroic, Force of Nature, that alone can blow people out from like 30 if they try to not block you.
Oh, absolutely. There is some extremely powerful things you can be doing with Force of Nature with Channel Mount Heroic. Bramble Spark is still a good card. It's still not something to be slept on. And you still can incorporate a lot of those lightning go again effects to have an efficient low to the ground aggro deck that can also play to these extremely powerful combo turns into those control matchups that can just go over the top of defenses. And we both think that Briar's in a pretty good position, kind of poised to kind of come in and just be low to the ground, be linear, be aggressive, and punish some of these Starvo decks that might be running a few too many element cards and are not able to block them out efficiently and trade back quite as much damage as they're doing, unless they just hit the nuts and get the Oakenolds.
Yeah, and Briar exists in a world where if she puts you in a position where you're forced to block and you can't, then she can punish you to no end. And if you race to the finish line and you both get to 10 at the same time, but Briar has the initiative, she is going to put you in a spot where you're going to have a really hard time defending her out because of all of the things that she has. Next up is, again, a deck that's interesting because he had his time and now he's kind of in a weird spot, it feels like, in the meta. Oldhim. I think the biggest thing with Oldhim is, when we were talking about it, is the deck needs recreated. He needs to be thought about outside the box again. The two decks that surprised everybody with Oldhim at first were the deck that won the calling and our boy John, who's been on the channel a couple times, John here local. I think those are the two decks. It's interesting, right? Because it was Michael, what was his name? The guy who won the calling. I can't remember his last name.
Oh, I can't remember.
Yeah. So the guy who won the calling, sorry, guy who won the calling, shout out to you. You did a good job. But his deck was interesting because everybody playing Oldhim played full defense, but not full defense. They were relying on just the pitch to ice, pitch to earth effects. He went a route where he added E-strikes and Art of Wars.
Right.
And being creative is what won him games. John, top 8 in the calling, did the same thing with a heavily defensive version with lots of turn timbers and staunch responses. And he was playing a full second cycle deck where every turn was going to be Oakenold, Red Glacial, you die. And there was nothing you could do about it. And I think that we need to revisit that type of Oldhim, right? Like that's where Oldhim needs to be, is he needs to be looked at again, and you need to find the new version of Oldhim that's powerful.
Right. There are a lot of tools Oldhim still has access to. He can interact with decks defensively in a lot of different ways. Don't get me wrong. Oldham's not going to come out of the gates and suddenly be playing Channel Mount Heroic and try to come at you with 4 wide on the combat chain. He's still going to always be in a defensively slanted deck, but there's a lot of different ways you could try to attack the metagame, and he just has to pin down that right core that he can then build off of. And that's usually the progression, is that it takes a while for the aggro decks to become their leanest selves, for the control decks to figure out how to best beat them.
Yep. Metas always exist aggro first, control later, as they evolve, because control needs to know what the questions are before they can have the answers to them.
Exactly.
So, next up is a surprise contender from our most recent ProQuest, a top 8 by Peter. He came with some heat and brought Levia, but I think he applied himself in a way that we both think you have to, which is Levia needs to be Spice Town, because playing Levia the Blood Debt way is a surefire way to take hard L's, because she's a deck that combats herself and is forced to play some suboptimal cards to not die. The fact that she has to run Hope Merchant's Hood in some builds just to try and have a get out of jail free card, that's not a place you want to be as a deck.
Right. Where she is one of the few heroes that can fold to herself in a way that just ends the game.
Yeah.
No other hero has that sort of tension in their gameplay. But what really led to the success of this Levia player is, like we said, he just always had a new trick up his sleeve, a new rabbit to pull out of the hat, a new ribbon out of the sleeve. He kept having spice. Yep. And that is, especially in the ProQuest type tournament, 6 rounds to get to top 8. You only need to catch people by surprise, a little bit in the beginning, get yourself off to the races. You could even try to save some top 8 spice, some tech for the sidelines, take people by surprise in top 8. She does have some powerful tools available to her, but if you're going to try to win the card quality battle, it's probably not going to happen.
Yep. I think Levia's best option is to just be unexpected. Don't do what people think of when they think of Levia. She's a good deck to do that in, because people don't really know what they're looking for when they sit down from a Levia. A lot of people don't even know what the cards do in the first place, so you can play the best versions of her cards and just play the best versions of her cards and then have some good spice. Our next up is is near and dear to Adam's heart, is his boy Bolton, and I think there's only one thing when it comes to Bolton that we could come up with, and that was Bolton needs to be the master of the swords. I think he has to be willing and capable of playing both game plans.
We've seen Adam be a staunch proponent of Raiden builds since day one.
Yep.
He is now only playing sabers, kicking and screaming, because he feels like he absolutely has to have some play in some of these matchups. And I really do think you have to have a flexible game plan in Bolton these days, and have the ability to play to that extreme combo turn, but then also play that, versatile aggro game plan. It's just hard to fit both of those plans within 80 cards. And the person that cracks the code is probably going to have a pretty powerful deck on their hands, because both of those strategies are really strong. And if you can whip one out at a moment's notice, you could even, catch a theoretical bad matchup by surprise and take a game.
Absolutely. And then his one of the counters to him that stood counter to him through Monarch and was released with him is Chain, who is also in one of those spots where it's kind of strange for him, because he's a really powerful deck, but he seems to have trouble into Starvo because Starvo can just out-aggress him or out-fatigue him if the build suits it. So we talked about the fact that I think he kind of needs to focus on going back to the big deck where it's necessary. I think a lot of chains went lean and mean because they realized they could kind of just aggro people. They were so fast out the gate that they could get on top of people. The problem is when decks are playing defensive, they fold again to themselves. They kind of have that weird Leviathan issue where they can fold to their own shackles. What makes them powerful is kind of what makes them weak. Now that Seeds doesn't exist, shackles can actually be a punishment again. So that's a good place to be. And then the other thing that we talked about with that big deck is being married to Unhallowed because it goes hand in hand with that concept, right?
I think it's really he's kind of an all or nothing sideboard plan. You're either playing the fat deck or you're playing your leaner plan, and there's not a really good way to hedge board and get good value out of having those extra cards. So Unhallowed Rites is one of those really linchpin cards that can help you hedge board, because if Starvo, for instance, he could play aggro, he could play defensive. If you show up like my opponent did in the semifinals, he had no recursion, no Unhallowed Rites, and I was on 38 when he was on Shackle 6. Yeah. It was not close. But I think Unhallowed Rites is going to be that key that will allow you to have some form of recursion and still set up big turns against these decks that might slant unexpectedly defensive.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we talked about that I think Chain needs to do is go back to exploring the card pool a little bit. I think he has some options in new cards. He's kind of been married to his game plan, and he needs to look at some of the things, the disruptive things, because we do exist in a meta, I think, where disruption is key. Less about punishing your opponent for letting you do what you want to do, and more about punishing them for letting you do what you want to do. Like, don't let them just benefit, right? Drawing a card is powerful, but making them discard a card is more powerful. That's where like things like Rico Corruption could potentially be really strong. Next up, we have Prism, who is a really strong deck, but I think runs into some of the issues of now having a disjointed card pool that have created disjointed decks. She has her really light illusionist specific stuff, and then the new illusionist stuff. I think in classic fashion, we have a lot of players who have jumped, they love to play Prism, and they see all these cool new illusionist cards. And I think you said it best. There's a lot of cards in there that they're not made for Prism, but she's the only illusionist and people like them, so they've crammed them in. So our argument for Prism, or our plea with Prism players, or the thing that we would recommend to you, is simply look to the past. In Prism's greatest moments, she caused pain and heartache through auras that punished us so hard for getting to try and play the game. And she said, if you don't deal with this aura alone will kill you. Because if I pop a bunch of spectral shields, you're going to take arcane, and then when you take arcane, you're going to take another damage, and then look at that, here's another Ode to Wrath that I played at instant speed, and you die. It's over. And
Prism, she is really interesting. She's a very skill intensive deck, and like you said, some of these new cards and some of the old cards don't play nice together. And I think it's really important, especially with Prism. Vestige of Soul is your powerhouse. That's the card you want to lean into. Make it as good as possible, and add in the new auras as needed to really get your game plan going. But
I think the new attacks, old auras is a mantra that we kind of came up with when we were talking about this one, because some of the things that these new attacks are really powerful.
Barraging Metamorph is fantastic.
It's so punishing. Just the idea of copying an old it's like, oh god,
when they play that off a yellow with a full grip. It's so scary. And that's the issue, is now Prism exists in this world where they made a bunch of auras, but none of them do anything, and cards going to their soul don't really give them any true benefit because they're running Tunic.
you're not worried about getting double Tome of Divinity, which is like their blowout play, was to double tome you and then set up this massive game plan where they played a couple auras, went into their turn, made a spectral, swung with Ode to Wrath, and having all these effects on the stack. And they're just kind of in a weird place where it feels like the deck is kind of disjointed. So look to the past, Prism players.
Right.
Look to the past. Next up, we move on. It's time to go back to the OG heroes, and we start with somebody who's had some good success, and that's Viserai. So Viserai's biggest issue now, we think, this is our cumulative knowledge, which isn't perfect. It's not totally objective, but in this case, I think it's correct. Is Viserai's plan has gotten too unfocused. For a long time, you were either a tempo Viserai player or you were an OTK Viserai player. And I get that the OTK version comes with its really dangerous world where someone can just, like Prism, can just respond to your Bloodsheath with an Arclight Sentinel and then you just lose the game. So I get that tempo has to be a part of your game plan. I think the problem is now everybody wants to build him as both, and as a result, he's become neither.
Mm-hmm. Right, jack of all trades, master of none.
Yep.
And the Viserai players that we've seen had success in our local area is they had a clear, defined game plan of what they were going to do. Mm-hmm. And the OTK game plan, while it does have that audible into its tempo plan, into those matchups where you're absolutely not going to be able to set up, it still is mainly devoted to that plan. The tempo plan if that's mainly going to be your strategy, you want to play those Revel and Rune Bloods, then you need to be tempoing them out as much as you can and have an idea of what you want to be doing in each specific matchup and plan ahead. Viserai will definitely benefit you for planning ahead.
Yeah, I think what ends up happening is that if your game plan isn't focused, you try to become too versatile. And when you try to become too versatile, you end up with cards that are bad in both builds, because you're going to have too many cards for them that they can't perfectly be separate in one deck. So what ends up happening is you have to sideboard in cards to either set up that are just bad, where if you lean one, you're going to have some bad cards in the other setup, but they're going to be acceptable cards to just pitch or defend with, and there are some of your go-to options for that. And that it helps you be focused on like the best version of the deck. Speaking of best version of the deck, Dash, I think she's a deck that got some new tools, and people haven't fully defined what the deck is supposed to look like and are maybe a little too married to an old strategy. She's kind of the opposite of Prism. People are married to Chamber, Purifier, Dash, and they haven't explored the idea of a world maybe without purifiers or with less purifiers, because Dash is one of the best decks in the game at playing defensive. I think she does a good job of potentially existing in a world where she could maybe be the King Starvo killer because she can set up a powerful endgame. The issue is she's not leaning into some of the new stuff. I personally think Dissolution Sphere is a crazy card that Dash hasn't figured out how to perfectly leverage, because when it's good, it's good. When it's bad, it's bad. But that's where you have to define the deck. What is the deck and how is it going to function the best?
Right. And something interesting we see in Everfest that we hadn't really seen before is these new 2-cost items that come at varying pitch values. So it allows you to play a lot different types of game plans. And whenever you get new items, it always brings me back to Spark of Genius, which is one of the best tutors we have in the game. And more targets for that just gives that card more power. And I think leaning back into that Spark of Genius and finding new ways to maybe get, just a little bit of extra value out of that card, a little bit of extra power, might be ways to push Dash into the next level.
Yep. I think Spark goes hand in hand with Pour the Mold, getting extra counters on your stuff, playing things out, just giving your powerful items immediate value when you're trying to play a slow controlly game and build a board state, just makes it much better. So the next guy on the list is near and dear to my heart, and I know when we talked about it, Nick immediately was like, well, I'm going to defer to you because Kano is the next talking point. And I will say, I think Nick made a really good point. I think practice, practice, practice. And then once you're done with that, do that about 14 more times and then triple that. And then you should have the appropriate amount of practice with Kano. And then after you've done all the practicing, what you need to do is spend an equal amount of time praying to the gods of LSS that somehow people can resolve this Starvo issue. Because I will tell you right now, when Starvo goes reveal, Crippling Crush 13 go again, it does not matter if they have no cards in hand and only 2 floating. It's just too much. If they just like a natty play Pulverize turn 1, it goes, here's half your life. Do you die? Because Kano is going to have cards that can't block, cards that block for 2, and cards that he just cannot block with if he wants to win. So he's put in a weird spot where the meta is so fast right now, so aggressive. Everybody's trying to hit harder, hit faster, hit bigger. Kano just needs Starvo to kind of move to the side. So we'll put him on the back burner, and hopefully soon I can come with a deck tech to the channel that will give people a way to play Kano in the current meta. Because I've been trying. I've been testing. Yeah. I'm trying. I promise you.
He has been. Don't worry.
I spend a significant amount of time in group chats making people convince me not to play Kano. That's the goal. So
you know you've been putting in work when you get people legitimately sitting at home thinking, Blake might play Kano. I'm putting in 2 null. It's happened many times.
I do take pride in going to locals and having people be like, "Oh, you're not on Kano? Well, great. Now I have 2 extra null rune for nothing." It's like, oh, I appreciate that. That means a lot to me. Next up is near and dear to Jason's heart. So we're pinging through everybody. We're gonna get to Nick's near and dear too at the end here. So Jason loves Azalea. I think Azalea's in a good place. I think Nick does too. We've talked about this on the channel. I think she's in a good spot. I think obviously she needs some build stuff, but I think the most important thing that she needs is for people to play her, right?
Yeah. I mean, Fatigue Shot is an incredible arrow. It is probably her best arrow. It is the only card that is for sure going to get you value in some way. There's no way your opponent's not going to attack you. And sure, it doesn't interact very positively with Kodachis, but that's only one matchup. It's a really great card. It solves a lot of really difficult matchups for her too. And I really think that there's a lot of new innovation that is to happen with Azalea. Dreadbore has a very powerful potential ability. Turning off D-Reacts from hand as a static effect that can be crazy, especially when we have a deck like Starvo in the meta that is pressuring everybody to play these D-Reacts to interact with that reliable dominate.
Yeah, she has multiple ways to deal with those. It's like she has ways to deal with D-Reacts that other people just don't, because other people have it on like CNC. She has it on a ton of her cards, which is super powerful. And then honestly, she has, what's crazy is, like, to your point, right? Like, Fatigue Shot is great in some matchups, but in some matchups it's not great. The beauty is she has red in the ledger, which says, well, you know what? Halving your attacks doesn't do much, but you know what does do a lot? Telling you literally can't do anything. And saying you get one thing, do one thing, and then pass it back to me. And I think she's in a good place. I just think that people don't play her enough.
Right. Read the Glide Path is another good card that really just helps.
Oh, geez, yeah.
Tie the whole puzzle, everything together.
Yep.
She just got a lot of those good linchpin cards that bring everything in the room.
So now we're going to move to the OGs, the original 4 in the game, and we're going to start with somebody who she doesn't really have 2 or 3 points. Dory, I think we have the perfect solution for playing Dory, which is hope for the Starvo treatment.
Yeah, that's, I think, your best bet.
Yeah, LSS just needs to help her out, because she can't outrace Starvo, and she can't stop people from playing the D-Reacts. Actually, she's the most negatively affected deck by Starvo tech. Starvo comes in and he's a big bully, and she becomes the like innocent bystander who just takes a punch to the face, because people not playing D-Reacts was part of her like game plan. It's like when nobody plays D-Reacts, Dory does better. And Starvo goes, well, guess what? You want to answer me? You need D-Reacts. And Dory's like, oh, come on. It's just like, I didn't even do this. I don't deserve this kind of treatment. And she's just kind of stuck in a world where she's being punished for the sins of Starvo.
And this is very much the traditional Dawnblade style of Dory.
Yeah.
There could be some innovation to be done with Dory sabers. The Slice and Dice is an interesting card.
Yep.
There's some new things there. Oath of Steel has a lot of potential power. But that's very unexplored territory as far as we're concerned. I don't really know if that's something that is good or not.
Yeah.
I would not feel like it is, but how Dory as you know it is probably not going to be coming back anytime soon.
Yep. So we move on to the Brute, who, huge shout out to Cody, finishing top 8 in our ProQuest with Rhinar. Yeah. Cody is he's a Rhinar loyalist. You know, I always call him, because I think it sounds funny, he's a truther. He's a Rhinar truther. You know, he believes that Rhinar has viability in play in like every meta. And I think it's true in this meta. I think the thing is people need to lean into certain things. So how do you adjust Rhinar for the current situation? I would argue that it's control where you have to, because Rhinar does play a very good control-oriented game. He has a breakpoint weapon. He can play that slow, grindy game to set up these huge, powerful, triple, quadruple intimidate turns off of like a Tunic resource, where he just plays 3 barraging beatdowns from hand, and then, you know, off of a Tunic and a card from his last card from hand, he could just play an intimidate attack from Arsenal, and he just goes, cool, you don't have any hand, take 20. And he's got spiky damage and plays that control game really well.
Yeah, and we really saw Cody specifically do really well, just going over the top. As a lot of these decks, he's another deck that can punish these D-reacts as people try to bring in these unmovables to interact with Starvo, and they think they can keep those in against Rhinar. You will learn the hard way of having an unmovable stranded in your arsenal as you get those 2 blues intimidated away turn after turn.
Yeah.
It's happened to the best of us.
Yep.
Or when you have all your hand intimidated away and that lone unmovable is staring back at you.
Yeah. It also, I mean, another thing, right, is unmovable interacts very poorly with Blood Rush Bellow, because when they Blood Rush you and they start taking, or not Blood Rush Bellow, sorry, Barraging Beatdown, it interacts very poorly, because when they take 2 cards from you and they tell you get to keep those cards, even if you have the blue to pay for unmovable, you can't fulfill the 2-card block. So now all of a sudden you unmovable their barraging beatdowns and took the original damage that was coming through anyway. So you can't temper their damage by just giving them whatever 2 cards are left over, which is how in the past people have basically interacted with Rhinar, is going, fine, I don't care what I block with, I'm just going to make barraging beatdown a dead card. I'm just not going to let it impact the game. And I think that's where, you know, he gets that little niche ability to kind of leverage people's unmovable, you know, sideboard in plan. Another thing is intimidate Starvo. That's such a good game plan there, because you know what, if they're holding their Pulse of Eisenloft or their Pulse of Candlehold, and you just happen to intimidate 2 other cards and then double barraging them into an attack, and you go, hey, you want to take 18 or do you want to give me that card? It becomes a very tough game for them to play.
And a lot of Starvo lists are playing 6 or if not more instants within the deck, between Pulse of Volthaven, the Awakenings, the Blizzards. If you end up playing the Exposed, and Blanks, I don't know if you have that in the matchup, but there is a lot of dead cards. You could leave them within hand, or if you're just presenting too much damage, they feel like they need to block, and the only card you've left them with is the lone lightning card.
Yep.
There's a lot of ways that Rhinar can interact positively with the new Bravo, for sure.
Yep. And then the last thing we said is just, you know, play to the double Blood Rush. Don't get in a hurry. Don't try to run past people and play aggressive. Double Blood Rush is how you can win some games. You can just spike people from 20 with a double Blood Rush turn.
Yeah, play to those big turns. Rhinar is the only one that can take your whole hand away and then smack you in the mouth for 20. Don't build to those turns, and there's some crazy things that can be done with that hero. Yeah,
he's really good. Next up, we've got Katsu. I think Katsu's in a really good spot. I know a lot of people think he is we've always said this on the channel. We're firm believers in the fact that Katsu is a Swiss killer. Like he will get you 3 or 4 wins in Swiss just by being Katsu and being so hard to block. And then when you add in even bigger than that, you add another punish for people who can't defend out Kodachis. He does become more punishing into matchups when you play against Crown and Shield. That is a really, really difficult obstacle for him to get over. And sometimes he just can't race chain at times if he draws poorly. But I just think even bigger than that is such a good card in the current meta where a lot of people want to not block and play punch. Like that card Punish is so hard.
Yeah. Even bigger than that can also let you set up some combo turns you really didn't have access to and makes a lot of cards a lot more consistent. We really came back to the Torrent of Tempo line as something that you should really be building around in this new metagame. 100 wins seems like it's very interesting, and there's definitely play for it. It just doesn't feel like it's coming together right now. But Torrent of Tempo and Break Tide can just lead you to having some of the most explosive turns. It's the only way for you to have 6 cards to have access to at the start of your turn as Katsu, and that is a terrifying thing as an opponent.
Yep. And I think one of the biggest gripes with Torrent of Tempo has always been that it's a conditional go again effect, which is something that even bigger than that resolves for you. If you have Torrents of Tempo in your arsenal, you can just pitch a blue, Kodachi, here you go. Big brain play for those of you who haven't thought about it. Kodachi, in reaction to the second Kodachi before it resolves, play your even bigger than that. So you've only dealt 1 damage at that point. Opt your 3, reveal whatever card you're going to reveal, make your Quicken token, not eaten up by second Kodachi. Now you got a Quicken token for that Torrent of Tempo that now comes in for 5 unconditional. You pop them with the Rushing River and you're just off to the races. Like that deck just can explode on people if they choose not to block it.
Oh, absolutely. And like we said, Break Tide, it's a house.
Yeah.
Play the card.
Yes.
You'll see what we mean.
Yep. We actually have been talking. So we have a local guy, Bergie, young guy. He's 17, but he's our local Katsu loyalist. Kid plays Katsu. That's all he does. He only knows Katsu. He's probably got more hours on Katsu than maybe anyone I've known. And I trust his analysis of cards. And I will tell you, like, I played his list, his straight 80 list at an armory, hadn't played Katsu since last Road to National season. I was like, I'm just going to build Bergie's list. I'm going to take it to an armory. I went 3-1. And part of the reason I lost the game was because I poorly sideboarded into chain and then got absolutely wrecked by like the first 4 turns of shackles. He just mauled me with just the hottest shackle. He hit every shackle for the first 4 turns and saw 2 Art of Wars. Like that's how you lose. I only lose because the list was bad. So we've been talking about bringing that list to the channel because I know people are looking at Katsu and they're interested. So finally, we will end our last one of this episode of our strategy series. We will talk about near and dear to Nick's heart and near and dear to my heart. He's done a lot of good work for us as OG Bravo players. The man, the myth, the legend, the OG, the stopper of the show, not the star, the stopper of the show. There is something here, right?
Oh yeah. We definitely feel so. There are some really interesting new tools in the new set, and imposing Visage is an extremely interesting tutor.
Yep.
The fact that you can use it to give a lot of these traditionally non-go again auras like Showtime, like Stamp Authority, go again, and still come in with your hammer afterwards really lends to some powerful setup turns, and it makes your terminal potential that much higher. You now have 6 functional copies of Showtime to show your opponent on turn 1, and put that Crippling Crush into Arsenal and bank up. Yep. There's a lot of cool new things that Bravo can do, and the new heave mechanic is let's just say I haven't been heaving too much as the star of the show, but the showstopper, he might be heaving a little bit more.
Yeah, I think when you're going to play OG Bravo, I think you have to embrace the control aspect of him. He's always been a great control deck in his ability to really tempo people's game plans because of his disruptive effects and his ability to defend very efficiently. And to me, that just means we go back to the roots, baby. It's time to go back. We had this discussion. I think who better to stop the star of the show than the showstopper? It's
absolutely
almost like LSS, who loves little hints and cues. Maybe they gave that to us.
Maybe they're just saying, hey, he's going to come out He's going to come out swinging, but just wait for the showstopper to come in and bring it all back to earth.
I think there's something there. So that is our take on what we think you can do between this week and next to get yourself ready for week 3 and week 4, probably the ProQuest. I think these are probably pretty good for a couple weeks. And we might revisit this. You know, we have another month of ProQuests or something like that, pretty close to it. So we might revisit it, or we'll visit the post ProQuest adjustments, you know, before we go to see like callings and pro tour stops. What are we going to do to make adjustments there? So that's what we've got for you this week. Thank you guys for tuning in and hanging out. We are going to be bringing more of this strategy series stuff to you. We're going to try to ramp it up because we want this competitive scene is ramping up. We're fired up. We're ready to go. We're ready to get some games in.
Oh yeah.
I know Nick's excited to be talking strategy. It's something we love to talk about, and we never shut up about how to tech decks, tune decks, find perfect lists. What's the exact 60 for every matchup is something we religiously approach every single deck with. So we're going to have some of those for you. We'll probably talk about decks and stuff. Nick, thanks for hanging out with me. I appreciate you being here. And
thank you.
We will see you guys next time. Peace.
Peace out, everybody.